Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist-Third Worldist Collective. In this podcast, I want to discuss the interface between two different subjects, which, as far as I know, have not been previously addressed. And that is the connection between academic Marxism on the one hand and Maoism-Third Worldism on the other. Now, the first I can speak to with some degree of knowledge. I'm not going to say authority. That sounds too arrogant. Although I was an academic Marxist for a long time, and I guess I still am, even though I am retired. I mean, once a professor, always a professor, I suppose. I have continued professing online in these podcasts, so I guess in that sense, I'm still a professor, but I don't work for a college or university anymore. I began as an academic Marxist full-time in 1985 and just stopped being one last year full-time. I was a Ph.D. student from 1980 to 1984, and that is when I studied Marxist sociology and became a true Marxist sociologist. Now, most Marxist sociologists are not Maoist-Third Worldists. We had one person in our department where I taught who was a Maoist. I won't mention his name for obvious reasons, out of consideration for his privacy. He retired about a year before I did. He and I are approximately the same age. But although he was a Maoist, he was not a Maoist Third Worldist. I wish I could have discussed it with him at the time, but sadly, most of the time when I knew him, I myself was not a Maoist. I went through a variety of different tendencies, from Titoism to a couple of different versions of Trotskyism to a very watered down version of Maoism called left refoundationism. And then I returned to Maoism-Third Worldism only this past June. So I am certainly not the world's greatest expert on Maoism-Third Worldism, but I know a bit about it. And so I think I can, at least in a preliminary sense, try to draw some connections between those two. First, I think it is really important that more Maoist Third Worldists become academics. There aren't that many, and I may be the only one. I know that there are people who are Maoist Third Worldists who have gotten various college degrees. I don't know of any, although I could be wrong, of course, who have or had PhDs. I certainly never met anybody in that category. I wish I had. If I had, that might have inspired me to return to Maoism-Third Worldism more quickly than I did. But Maoism-Third Worldism has unfortunately not been studied or approached from an academic perspective. And that is what I am suggesting in this podcast. Now, what academic perspective would I recommend? It is one that I have previously talked about, and that is the critical realism of Roy Bhaskar. Roy Bhaskar was a very well-seasoned academic. When he retired, he was a member of the faculty at the University of London. He had written numerous books, all on critical realism, including the final phase of his critical realism, the philosophy of meta-reality. Now, I have talked about critical realism and meta-reality a fair amount on this podcast, So I don't see any need to discuss that any more in depth, just as I don't see a need to discuss Maoism-Third Worldism any more in depth. If you want to know more, you can go back and listen to my earlier podcasts, or listen to the podcasts made by other people, and perhaps you will be on even better footing. But at least what critical realism can do is it can give an academic an approach to Maoism-Third Worldism, which is accepted in academia. The critical realism of Roy Bhaskar, which is often called Bhaskarian critical realism, is a legitimate academic philosophy, or as Roy Bhaskar called it, metatheory, as I prefer to call it, a methodology for doing all sorts of things, including studying and examining the world, and a methodology for establishing communism. Now, Roy Bhaskar was not a third worldist. For that matter, hardly any communists are third worldists. Third worldism is a relatively small movement, and Maoism-Third Worldism is even smaller. Most third worldists are not Maoists. So when you're talking about Maoism-Third Worldism, I don't know how many people are included in that category. And I'm not even going to try to guess. I thought about guessing, but I'm hesitant to do that because most likely I'll be wrong. So I really don't know how many people there are out there who identify with a tendency. What I can say is that, much to my surprise, many Maoist third worldists are autistics. Not most, as far as I know, but many. There are many Maoist third worldists that I have met online who are also autistics. Why is that? My guess is because autistics tend to be somewhat eccentric. I know that I certainly have been an eccentric throughout my life, and Maoism-Third Worldism is an offbeat or eccentric communist Marxist tendency. So it would make sense that an autistic would be attracted to Maoism-Third Worldism. But you don't need to be an autistic, obviously, to be a Maoist third worldist. I do think, however, that Bhaskarian critical realism can be a useful grounding for anybody who wants to approach Maoism third worldism from a good academic perspective. Here is why. What critical realism does is it provides literally a methodology for attaining communism. Without getting into too much detail, which I won't in this podcast, I don't want to bore the hell out of you. Critical realism basically presents a way in which we can establish communism. The basic approach is by looking at two different things which I have discussed previously: demi-reality, which is Roy Bhaskar's translation of the Sanskrit word Maya for illusion, and co-presence. Roy also used demi-reality as a term for disunity, or sometimes he called it splitting, which I think is quite colorful. Co-presence, on the other hand, is a term for unity. So essentially what you are doing is you are talking about a way to leave behind the demi-reality of the world and to approach a condition of co-presence or unity. Now, when we look at the first world, which includes where I live here in the belly of the beast, the United States. This country of mine is a complete disaster. I am not a proud American. So if you are an American and you consider yourself to be a proud American, you probably will be turned off by some of the things I say. The reason I am not a proud American is because I simply observe what the United States has been doing as a colonial power, as an imperial power, as a hegemonic power. We have been conquering the world and trying to bend third world countries to our own will. That is not good. That is not nice. That is not respectful. We have no right, because simply because we are somehow considered to be, whether rightly or wrongly, the world's sole superpower. Maybe that's true. I don't know. But even if it is, it's not a justification for treating the rest of the world like trash, for trying to manipulate the world, and for turning the world into effect our own image, making the world an image of ourselves. The United States by itself is bad enough. More United Stateses would be even worse, in my opinion. So I see the United States as one of the prime examples of demi-reality. It is both a country based on illusion, the illusion of capitalism. I guess one might say the delusion of capitalism, but it's certainly both an illusion and a delusion. And it is a country which right now is experiencing a tremendous amount of internal disunity, or what some people, including myself, occasionally will refer to as tribalism. There are very isolated tribes in the United States. Some are connected with the so-called left, which to me is not usually the left, it's progressivism, and some of it is connected with the right. And it's even more complex than that, because there really are many lefts and many rights, and they don't see eye to eye either. So we truly are a tribalistic country. We are not a country which functions in unity. And so in order for the US to do anything worthwhile, it needs to have some level of unity. And I would argue one of the reasons why communism cannot be established, at least initially, in the US is because of its tribalism, or because of its demi-reality and disunity. That is true to varying degrees with other countries too. That is true with Canada. That is true with many European countries, with Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. So we are not the only demi-real country in the world, certainly not. But I think that we are at the top of the list. No country even comes close to us, in my humble opinion. Well, maybe not so humble, but in my opinion, we are at the top of the list of countries which are truly demi-real or disunified or illusory. And so I have no hope. I have no hope that the US will, at least right now, become a source of revolution. Does that mean that Americans cannot play a role in revolution? No. Despite the fact that we are immersed in demi-reality, despite the fact that we are a first world country, an oppressor country, a country which tries to control the world and has not done a very good job of it. We can, as I have said before, engage in conscientization. That term was coined by Paulo Freire as a part of his critical pedagogy. Paulo Freire was a Brazilian educator who developed a very unique approach to teaching. And it is one which has been adopted by Marxist educators and maybe other educators as well, I don't know, around the world, not only in Brazil. There are actually a lot of interesting parallels between critical pedagogy and theologies of liberation, in the sense that both of them are to a great extent grounded in Roman Catholicism, and then they take Roman Catholicism and incorporate Marxism into it. Now, am I a Roman Catholic? No. Have I ever been a Roman Catholic? No. Do I respect Roman Catholicism? Absolutely. I love Roman Catholicism. I always have since I was a kid. Why? I don't know. I just do. I especially love Pope Francis. I think he is a true gift to the world. He is certainly not a Marxist. I don't even know if he would consider himself to be a socialist, but maybe he would. I don't know. But his openness is wonderful. The fact, for example, that he has recently hosted a gathering of trans people at the Vatican is something that was inconceivable before Pope Francis. So I really like Pope Francis. For that reason, I also like critical pedagogy. The fact that it is grounded to some degree in Roman Catholicism, but also grounded in Marxism. It is a way of trying to elevate the critical consciousness and conscience of one's own students. That is something which I attempted to do throughout my career. Now, I did not see my job as creating communists. I think that would have been extraordinarily unethical. It is not my business what the political, economic, and philosophical views are of my students. My job was simple: to teach them sociology. And I would try to teach as many different perspectives as I could. But I always made it clear what I was. There was never any doubt that I was a commie, because I would wear clothing similar to this. Not this hat in particular, which looks really, really weird, but I would wear a lot of commie baseball caps. And so every one of my students knew that I was a communist. Some liked it, probably most did not, but I think the majority of them put up with it. You know, professors are often quite weird, and we often have views which are vastly different from our students. So they put up with the fact that I dressed like that and I walked around with commie clothing. Needless to say, going back to critical realism specifically, this country, as filled as it is with splitting, with demi-reality or disunity, can certainly not expect to lead the world into communism. We are the center of capitalism. And American leaders, whether political, religious, or otherwise, appear committed to the ideologies and there are different ideologies of capitalism. And so I don't really think that is a feasible possibility. Is it possible? Well, I guess it's possible it might snow here tomorrow, even though it was 80 degrees here today in the winter. Is it possible? Yeah, I guess it's possible. Is it likely? No, it's not likely at all. So I think that we need to look toward the third world. So not only is there demi-reality, again, going back to critical realism within the United States, but there is also demi-reality between the first world and the third world. The way in which the US treats the third world is disunifying. The competition which often exists between the US and third world countries, especially over commercial products, is also demi-reality. So I would say literally, if there was one word that I would pick to describe the state of the world as it exists now at the end of 2023, it's demi-reality. We are a demi-real world. And that demi-real world was created by the first world, and especially by the United States. So that, I think, can be the foundation for a Maoist third worldist academic. In fact, I would strongly recommend it. There are not that many academic Marxist perspectives. Not that many. There are a few. But I personally don't think that they are that good. If you want to know what they are, I can tell you. Leave me a comment on the bottom, and I'll give you a list if you really want that list. I can tell you what some of the other academic approaches are to Marxism. But I think that critical realism justifiably is at the top. Nothing else even comes close. Roy Bhaskar was brilliant. His writing is sometimes difficult, but you can get past it. And if you can't get past it, you can read stuff by me and other critical realists, which I think are more approachable in many cases than the work of Roy Bhaskar. So I think that is a good foundation for becoming a Marxist academic. Then, once you've done that, you can add on top of it Maoism-Third Worldism, which again is a perspective which focuses on the third world, not the first world, as being the place for the beginning of communism. Maybe not the end. I suppose it's possible that the first world may eventually join the third world. Am I optimistic in that regard? Not really. Not when I look at the world today, I'm not. But that may just be my own personality, my own tendency toward being a cynic. So perhaps nobody should take me seriously when I say that. But in all honesty, I just don't really see much hope for the first world either now or, to be honest, even in the future, although I'm very wary of predicting the future. But by the same token, my hope for the future when it comes to the first world, and especially when it comes to my own country, the US, is not that good. So I think that critical realism can be used as a methodology for establishing a communist world system in the third world. Now, how precisely that would happen, that's not really for me to say. I don't live in the third world. Geographically, I'm close to it. I'm 2 miles north of Mexico, But that's not enough. I don't live in Mexico. I go there, but I don't live there. I don't have to deal with the constant fear of being slaughtered by the cartels. What will sometimes happen is a cartel member or members will knock on a door. I guess they knock or ring the bell or something, and will say, gather your belongings, be out of the house in 20 minutes. If you are not, we will kill you, and they will. That's what the cartels do. That's why there are so many Mexicans who live in Mexico but are afraid to cross the border into the US. That's why there are so many Mexican Americans who have relatives in Mexico who haven't seen them in 30 years because they're afraid to cross the border into Mexico. It's really a tragedy. Now, am I afraid to go into Mexico? Maybe I'm foolish, but the answer to that is no. I guess because I really don't care about my continued existence. I mean, if somebody wants to kill me, I would say, okay, go ahead. I'm here. You kill me, fine. That's pretty much my attitude. I realize it's an unusual attitude, but then again, I am an autistic, so I'm weird. Uh, but I really don't care. And so my desire to interact with Mexicans and to engage in conscientization, not only through podcasts like these, but also by direct conversation with Mexicans and Mexican Americans who would constitute what would generally be called the fourth world, meaning people who are underprivileged people in their own societies. Those societies may be first world societies, like the United States, or they may be third world societies, like Mexico. So the fourth world, sometimes called the subaltern, a term which was used in its present context first by the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, who was really persecuted by Mussolini. I really want to help those people. I really want to reach out as much as I can to both the third world and to the fourth world. And I think that critical realism gives me an academic methodology for doing just that. There are a lot of Ph.D. dissertations on critical realism. They do not include my own, because when I wrote my Ph.D. dissertation and finished it in 1984, I was not a critical realist. So you're not going to find it in my dissertation, although my dissertation is online if you want to read it. But there are more recent dissertations which have been written on critical realism, and you can search for them and find them. Many of them are open access. Many are Creative Commons, and you can get an idea of how people are approaching academic subjects using critical realism, or approaching any subjects using critical realism, which is basically an academic perspective. It's not exclusively academic, meaning there are some people who are not academics, who are critical realists, but critical realism, I would say, is, for better or worse, dominated by academics, because Roy Bhaskar himself was an academic. So I hope that has given you some food for thought, some possible ways to become a Maoist third worldist academic. Maybe that's something you've never thought of. I don't know. maybe that's something you have thought of, but you've wondered, how can I integrate Maoism, Third Worldism into an academic context? I've given you at least one possible answer, and what I think is the best possible answer: the critical realism of Roy Bhaskar. For now, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Maoist-Third Worldist Collective. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.